stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Welcome to the Revelation 13 podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Revelation 13 podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hopwood. Stories of a giant, hairy, upright, walking, human-like ape have been reported throughout history. From Asia to America, sightings have persisted, and the advancement of technology has given those searching for it new tools to help them document and find it. Also, the advances in DNA and computer analysis point to the reality that something unknown is out there. The encounters that people have had through the years gives us the best insight into the nature of the creature. Each encounter gives us a piece of knowledge that may one day lead to uncontestable proof of this creature's existence. One of the oldest known newspaper accounts of a Bigfoot sighting comes from the September 22, 1818 issue of the Watchman newspaper from New York State. The article states that a few days earlier near Ellisburg, a man of unquestionable veracity saw an animal that resembled a wild man of the woods. This term, wild man of the woods, indicates that this type of creature had been reported before, and they already had a descriptive name associated with it. The creature was described as a large man covered with hair. It had walked out of the trees and onto the road a few yards from the witness. When it noticed the man watching it, the creature turned away and ran off, leaning forward as it went away. This reference to a strange gait or walk that the creature had was also evident in the Roger Patterson film from 1967. The account also states that the creature left behind footprints that were human-looking, but very wide at the toes. In 1851, 2 hunters in Greene County, Arkansas, saw a Bigfoot trying to catch a calf from a herd of domestic cattle. They described it as an animal bearing the unmistakable likeness of humanity. He was of gigantic stature. The body was coated with hair, and the head had long locks that fairly enveloped the neck and shoulders. When the creature noticed the people in the area, it stopped chasing the calf and stared at the hunters for a little while, and then ran off at a fast pace, leaving behind human-like 13-inch footprints. 1869, Antioch, California. A hunter working in the area pitched his camp and went out hunting during the day. He returned and found the ashes from his fire scattered around, and giant man-like footprints dotted his campsite. Hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature who invaded his camp, he hid in a patch of brush that would give him a good view of his campsite. 2 hours later, the creature came back, and this is how he described it. The creature, whatever it was, stood 5 feet high, and was disproportionately broad and square at the shoulders, with arms of great length. The legs were very short, and the body long. The head was small compared to the rest of the creature, and appeared to be set upon the shoulders without a neck. The whole creature was covered with dark brown and cinnamon-colored hair, which was quite long in some parts on the head, and it was standing in a shock and growing close down to the eyes. The creature looked around. It kicked the embers of the campfire, picked up a smoldering stick, and whirled it around in the air, making a circle of smoke. After the stick went out, the creature threw its head back and whistled, picked up another stick and started swinging it around again. After 15 minutes, the creature was joined by another. This one was a female. They both turned and walked past the hunter within 20 yards of his position. In 1895, Riley Smith was picking berries near Winsted, Connecticut. When his bulldog came running and whimpering back to him from out of the woods, Smith looked up to see a large man, stark naked and covered with hair all over his body. When it emerged from the trees and saw Riley Smith, it let out a terrifying yell. It turned and went back into the woods. Smith later would recall being paralyzed with fear at the sight of the beast. In 1904, an Oregon newspaper reported the story of William Ward, who claimed his log cabin was attacked by a giant hairy wild man. Ward was with a friend and while they were sitting by the stove they heard something walking around the cabin. Suddenly the creature grabbed hold of the cabin's corner and started shaking it. Ward ran to the front of the door, armed with his rifle, and when he opened the door he saw the creature walking away. Ward got off a shot, but missed. A few nights later the creature returned. This time it was pounding on the door. Ward again went to the door with his rifle, only to find the creature walking off into the dark. Ward fired out at the creature, and Ward missed again. Before he could get back into the cabin, a 4-pound rock came out of the night, just missing him. The creature was described as being 7 foot high, broad hands and feet. His body was covered by a prolific growth of hair and looking like the devil. In episode 4 of this show, we went over the 1924 account from the Oregonian newspaper about the encounters the miners in the area had with multiple Bigfoot creatures. In 1958, when more footprints and encounters with these creatures were happening and being reported in the papers, researchers looked into finding witnesses from past events. They found Fred Beck, one of the 5 miners who had went through the Bigfoot attack on their cabin. He was able to give them more details about what went on at Ape Canyon, near Mount St. Helens. The 5 prospectors were panning for gold around the Lewis River: Fred Beck, Marion Smith, Roy Smith, Gabe Lefevre, and John Peterson. They had been working the claim for 2 years before the encounter occurred. In that time they had come across some 14-inch footprints, but they generally ignored them. But in July of 1924, events started occurring that they could not ignore. The men started hearing what sounded like someone banging on a hollow wooden trunk, and after that they would hear a loud whistling call from the wooded ridge that overlooked their camp. The periodic sound continued for a week. At this point, the miners started carrying their rifles with them whenever they would leave the camp. Marion Smith and Fred Beck were fetching water when they saw the creature watching them from behind a pine tree 100 yards away. Smith fired 3 shots and that had hit the tree. The creature went away uninjured. It reappeared from the trees at a distance of 200 yards. Fred Beck fired at it and missed. They went back to the cabin and informed their fellow prospectors of the situation. They decided to leave, but it was getting late and they didn't want to be in the woods at night, so they decided to spend the night in the cabin. At midnight they awoke to a loud thump of something hitting the cabin wall. They could hear the sound of footsteps outside the cabin. Smith looked through a gap between the logs of the cabin and saw 3 creatures. They began picking up rocks and started throwing them at the cabin walls. The miners picked up their rifles and braced themselves for a confrontation. At least 2 of the creatures climbed onto the roof and started jumping up and down on it. Another creature began pounding on the door. Beck braced the door with a wooden pole, and after a few minutes the creatures left, but the miners' relief would only last less than an hour. The creatures returned and again attacked the cabin. The creatures would leave and again return one more time, but would leave as dawn started to break. When the frightened miners were certain that the creatures were gone, they packed up and left the cabin. Not being able to carry all their gear, they left behind over $200 of equipment. As they passed down the